Tonight, John Ankerberg examines the views of secular humanism and compares them with the views of Orthodox Christianity. John's guest representing secular humanism is Dr. Paul Kurtz, author of the Humanist Manifesto 2 and a Secular Humanist Declaration. Dr. Kurtz is also the editor of The Free Inquiry, the main secular humanist magazine in America. He is also professor of philosophy at State University of New York at Buffalo. John's second guest is Dr. Norman Geisler, professor of philosophy and theology at Dallas Theological Seminary. Dr. Geisler is the author of more than 20 books on philosophy and theology, including the book Is Man the Measure? An evaluation of contemporary secular humanism. In Program 1, both sides will discuss, does today's scientific evidence for the origin of the universe point people to secular humanism or biblical Christianity? In Program 2, which view best encompasses the scientific evidence for the origin of first life on the earth? In Program 3, are secular humanists threatening the academic freedom of American schools when they advocate laws that will only allow teachers to present secular humanist views when they forbid teachers to present scientific facts that might disprove humanist theories? In Program 4, are secular humanists right or wrong in stating there is insufficient evidence that Jesus Christ is God? In Program 5, can the secular humanist rationally justify why he is a moral person when he does not believe God exists? And in Program 6 and 7, both sides will respond to questions from the audience. We invite you to hear these discussions.
Welcome. We're talking about secular humanism, and my guests tonight are Dr. Paul Kurtz, the man who drafted the Humanist Manifesto 2 and a Secular Humanist Declaration. He's also the editor of the main secular humanist magazine in America, entitled Free Inquiry, and he's professor of philosophy at the State University of New York at Buffalo. Also, Dr. Norman Geisler, Christian scholar, who's a professor at Dallas Theological Seminary and the author of many books on philosophy and theology.
Okay, I address this to Paul. In my belief as a Christian, I'm a Christian, I direct this to you concerning death and what happens when you die. In hearing your views as a skeptic who is not sure, I guess that's what that means, if I as a Christian am wrong and you are right, I've lost nothing and I die and cease to exist as you. But if you're wrong and I'm right, you've lost everything. How do you feel about that? And more importantly, to you, is it worth it?
Well, that's Pascal's famous wager that you've offered. I can find no evidence for the existence of an afterlife, even independent of religion. In religion, the belief in salvation is an article of faith. People hope that they will continue to live after the existence of the body. But spending years in research and ghost hunting and examining the evidence for life after life, I don't find sufficient evidence to support that claim. Therefore, it's an idle gesture. Now, I can turn the wager around that if God doesn't exist and this is merely an illusion, then much of what you do is a waste of time. What you ought to try to do is try to build the best society we can live in here and now and do whatever you can to make life meaningful today.
The problem with that, Paul, is that the very people that you quote constantly are constantly concerning the fact of the need for God and the quest for God and meaning of life, I think are the strongest testimonies in evidence that you're wrong. For example, Sartre said, I needed God. Or Camus, nothing can discourage the appetite for divinity in the heart of man. Or Nietzsche, I hold up before myself the images of Dante and Spinoza, who Geisler was talking about before, who were better at accepting the lot of solitude. And in the end, all those who somehow still had a God for company. My life now consists in the wish that it might be otherwise, and that somebody might make my truths appear incredible to me.
Well, but all three rejected belief in God. I affirm you can lead an authentic life, and you can find life rich. There's a kind of fullness of existence in the plans and projects that we create. Life is an adventure. Why need of an illusion?
Well, one of the secular humanists that I would be very proud of that wrote in your book, one of the essays in your book on moral problems in contemporary society, H.J. Blackman, formerly director of the British Humanist Association, said that the problem as he saw it was the pointlessness of it all.
Really? I think you may be quoting Blackham out of context, because Blackham, I heard Blackham speak and read much of what he said, that Blackham has argued continuously that life is full of meaning, that there are points, and that the fact that one doesn't believe in God does not deaden the appetite or the lust for living. On the contrary.
Well, I could go on with the list. Maybe
and great artists
you want
and
to say something?
scientists
You've
and
done some
poets
research in
and
this
writers
area.
have affirmed the opposite.
Well, just let me add one thought. In my research, my doctoral research in this very point, I found that atheists had a need for God and admitted it. Sartre did, Camus did. Walter Kaufman said, man is a God-intoxicated ape. Camus, the quote that you said there, they admitted it, but what they were saying is this: I have a need for God, but he doesn't exist. Now that's like saying, I am starving, but there's no food anywhere. I can understand someone saying, I'm starving, I didn't find food. But to say I'm starving and there's no food anywhere, don't look for it. I'm thirsty and there's no water anywhere, don't look for it. That's cruel. And to say you need God, but there isn't a God, don't look for it, is also cruel. At least you ought to take a look at the evidence.
Then human personality would really be a disease, because you have these longings and you can't fulfill it.
Well, not everybody has those longings. None of my friends have those longings. Some people do.
Well,
not everybody
there's a reason
does.
for that. These people we quoted were just atheists, and there's a reason some atheists don't have those longings. And it's spelled out pretty clearly in Romans chapter 1 and verse 18 in the Bible. It said they turned from the God who was there, and God gave them over to a reprobate mind. You can get to the point that after you reject the truth, then you no longer have those longings, but they killed the longings that were initially there.
Question.
Dr. Geisler, did you reason your way to faith in God? And if not, can you expect Dr. Kurtz to do the same?
As a matter of fact, I did. I did not come from a Christian home, and I had to reason my way through this myself, and I studied philosophy and I studied history, and I came to the conclusion, as many others who weren't rooted in Christian homes, that the evidence is stronger for Christianity, historical evidence and scientific evidence for God, than for any other belief system. So I committed myself to that, and I haven't found in 30 years of continual research after that point anything to disrupt that, only further things to confirm it.
Mr. Kurtz, don't you believe that your real problem is that you don't want to answer to a holy, righteous God?
I don't want to answer to a holy, righteous God. You know, I have no fear. If God exists and I'm brought to the judgment day and he says, and I'm called into account, people say, what happens at the judgment day? I said I would have no fear, because I would say to God, you didn't give me any evidence. And if man is rational and created in God's image, then I guess God would respect that.
Norman?
Well, my only response is, he gave the evidence, but you have to open your eyes to see it.
It seems like Paul preached that the very evidence was the resurrection, which you denied, that God will judge the world by one man rising from the dead in Acts.
He didn't give objective, cooperative, independent evidence.
Question.
My question is, Dr. Kurtz, I've read your books and enjoyed them, and I just wanted to give you the opportunity to say a little more about what humanism has contributed to our society.
Oh, I thought I was in the arena being thrown to the lions, and here's one person who's going to come into the arena with me. Well, I think that humanism is a positive, I appreciate your question, because I think humanism is a positive moral point of view, and there are great figures in the history of Western civilization who have been humanists and have contributed immeasurably, whether it's Mark Twain or Thomas Edison or Margaret Sanger or Michelangelo or Beethoven, or you go through the whole history, or Freud, right down. I mean, you find these people who are concerned with the human condition, concerned with furthering the well-being of human beings, and that's what humanism is, an effort to improve the human condition, to ameliorate a better life here and now, to solve human problems by using intelligence and science and reason as best we can. And I'm really surprised and dismayed at the fact that humanists are attacked and criticized because they want to use human intelligence and they want to contribute to the good life. And people say, if you don't accept my religion, you're damned. And I say that there are many people who don't accept your religion and still are good citizens and good persons.
Paul, you know, historically, I guess the reason some Christians, some people wish there'd be more, but in 1961, the secular humanist doctrine was recognized as a religion by the Supreme Court. In 1962, the Supreme Court said that state-required devotional prayers were banned from the schools. In 1963, devotional Bible reading was forbidden in the schools. In 1968, laws against teaching evolution were ruled unconstitutional in the Arkansas trial. In 1980, the Supreme Court said that posting the Ten Commandments in the classroom is unconstitutional. And in 1982, a law mandating the teaching of creation with evolution was banned in Arkansas. Are you legislating your morality down Christians' throats? Are you legislating your morality down Christians' throats?
I would hope not. You know, I think this great country is based upon the First Amendment, and that's the separation of church and state, and that's the notion that the state shall not intervene in religion. And I think that the Supreme Court's rulings are all an effort to interpret it, the views of Jefferson and Madison and the great founders of this great republic, who incidentally were humanists and deists and believed in freedom of conscience and believed that our society ought not to establish a religion. Now, it seems to me the great virtue of America has been that we've not had the fanaticism and we've not had the religious wars, and that belief and unbelief have flourished in this country because of that. And I deplore the efforts in recent years to bridge this basic principle of the separation of church and state. I think the Supreme Court decisions in this regard have been an effort to support the First Amendment.
John, I think it's just the opposite. This great country began with these great words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There are at least three great principles in there. A Creator, man was created, and certain moral absolutes. The Supreme Court has ruled that you cannot teach those three things in the public school. Humanists have superimposed their morality by way of the Supreme Court so that you cannot even teach the principles of the Declaration in American schools. That is not freedom.
You know, that's not true. The schools do teach the Declaration of Independence. All the students know about it.
The truths of the Declaration.
And, truths.
Creator, creation, and God-given moral absolutes have been ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court.
They've not been ruled unconstitutional. What the Supreme Court has said is that the schools should not indoctrinate for religion. You can teach about religion.
But they're indoctrinating in humanist views that say there is no creator, no creation, and no supernatural. You can indoctrinate in those views. You just can't indoctrinate in those Christian views.
But we live under the Constitution. Now, the Declaration of Independence is crucial. We all believe in it. It was written by Jefferson.
You believe in it? You believe there's a creator? Man was created?
No, I don't believe. I believe in the Declaration of Independence against tyranny, against the established Church of England.
But these truths are self-evident, it says. And what's self-evident, you don't believe.
Well, I don't know that they're self-evident, but I believe in the right of free conscience, of life and liberty, in the pursuit of happiness. But we live under the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment.
And the Declaration of Independence is unconstitutional.
But now, the Declaration of Independence was written by Jefferson, who was against any tyranny over the mind of man and believed in religious liberty. And that was fundamental.
And I challenge you to go to Washington, D.C. and stand in front of Jefferson's figure and look over the pond at the White House and look up on the granite and see what he said. He said, God who gave us life, gave us liberty. Can a nation endure when we have neglected that these liberties are a gift of God? That's what Jefferson believed.
Jefferson also believed that the state ought not to intervene and that the state ought not to proclaim a religion, and he believed in religious liberty.
That's exactly right, and we believe that too, Paul. Okay. We think the state should not intervene and say that the only thing you can teach in the public school is no creator, no creation, and no God-given moral absolutes. That's intervening and superimposing your humanist religion down our throats.
I think that's a libel against the school teachers of America, who are loyal Americans. Many of them are religious and believe in God. They represent a wide range of opinion, and to blame the school teachers and to say that these things are being forbidden, I think is
I'm not
totally
blaming the
mistaken.
school teachers. I'm blaming the Supreme Court.
Well,
those poor school teachers who would like to do something, they have their hands tied. They can't even post the Ten Commandments on a bulletin board. They could put up your secular humanist manifesto on the bulletin board, but they can't put the Ten Commandments up. Is that fair?
They've not. Well, I don't think that they posted the secular humanist bulletin on the bulletin board. I don't think American teachers are humanists.
You're not answering my question.
I don't think that one should be. I don't think that you should post the Humanist Manifesto 2 on the bulletin board.
They can, though.
I don't know that they can. It seems to me that one ought not to be allowed to argue for religion or against religion. Either atheism.
I thought you said humanism wasn't a religion.
Okay, but either atheism or religious or theism at the same time. The point is that the schools should be neutral, and either religion or non-religion shouldn't be taught in the schools.
That's exactly right. They should be neutral, and they're not neutral when the only things you can teach are the basic premises of secular humanism.
Well, that's not true.
Let me finish. And you can't teach the basic premises of the Declaration of Independence. That's hardly neutral.
Well, I think you've caricatured what is going on. I think you maligned the teachers. I think our school system is an excellent school system.
I malign the Supreme Court.
I think the curriculum and the schools of America have created a great nation, that our students are benefiting from that. These efforts now to attack the schools and to impose religious dogma on the schools, it seems to me, will erode education.
Exactly right. And the only religious dogma you can teach in the schools right now is secular humanist religious dogma, and that's got to change.
All right, could I jump in here too?
Is not a religious dogma.
Let me jump in here too, and that is that one of the men that signed the Manifesto 2 with you, Paul, said this concerning secular state of our schools. Okay, he says, I think that the most important factor moving us toward a secular society has been the educational factor. This is Paul Blanchard again. Our schools may not teach Johnny to read properly, but the fact that Johnny is in school until he is 16 tends to lead toward the elimination of religious superstition. The average American child now acquires a high school education, and this militates against Adam and Eve and all the other myths of alleged history. Now, Paul Blanchard was one of the men that signed it, and I think this is what Christians are concerned about, is that by legislating the fact that the beliefs of millions of Christians across the country can't be brought up in the schools in any area. You can't pray, you can't read the Bible, you can't talk about God, can't talk about the facts of science that relate to creation. You have legislated your morality down the throats of millions of Christians, and they think that it's unfair, especially according to your own principles.
In response to your question, John, I don't agree with Paul Blanchard on that point. The fact that he endorsed the Humanist Manifesto doesn't mean that I accept everything that he says, nor anyone else. But, you know, this is an open society. Surely Christians have every opportunity to express their point of view. There's a free press. There are free churches. I think religion is probably more vigorous here than almost anywhere else. If you begin to establish a church by allowing the church to express itself through governmental institutions, I mean, why not in the firehouse? Why not in the town hall? Why not open up all of the institutions of government to allow religion to interfere? Okay, you say you're nodding. I don't know if you agree or disagree. You're then establishing a religion, you say. And that's contrary to the First Amendment.
You're just opening up the fact of having a discussion about religion.
Is based on.
Aren't you making a differentiation between the fact if I have a discussion about religion and belief that you ought to believe this religion?
Well, I think that we ought to teach about religion in the schools. I think
we can't even mention it, Paul.
Of course you mention it. I think anyone who's taken a history course has read about the history of religion in the schools. Anyone who takes a sociology course.
Science?
Anyone who takes a philosophy course. Of course you can learn about religion.
How about
students learn
science?
About religion. What you cannot do is indoctrinate for a religious belief. That's contrary to the spirit of a pluralistic society.
Dr. Geisler, in
live.
the Arkansas trial, you spoke to this very fact of concerning the difference between teaching religion and teaching facts, as well as then talk to the second question of the fact of what would you suggest Christians do in a society where now we are saying, like in Los Angeles, where the state there said that Bible studies had to be zoned and you couldn't have them in your home, and then it had to be revoked. But the whole society is going that direction, that they're going to tell us where you can think and talk about these topics. Now, this is America.
Well, see, here's the problem. If it's one of our beliefs, by definition for a secular humanist, it's religious and can't be taught. If it's one of their beliefs, by definition, it isn't religious and can be taught. You talk about heads I win and tails you lose. You talk about sophisticated intellectual bigotry. That's it. Secondly, the Declaration of Independence had three basic principles: God, man created in the image of God, and moral absolutes. Humanists believe exactly the opposite. No God, no man created in the image of God, and no moral absolutes. So you have three religious beliefs by Judeo-Christian tradition, three by humanism, which is called a religion and recognized as religion. Now, here's what the Supreme Court said. You can't teach these. Can't teach these three. What does that mean? The only thing you can teach are the religious beliefs of secular humanism. If that's not establishing secular humanism, I don't know what is.
It's not establishing secular humanism because you can teach science and literature and the arts and philosophy and history and sociology and everything else. You open to the world of knowledge, and you teach about religion. What you don't teach, you don't try to establish a specific religion in the United States. America includes Buddhists and Hindus and Jews and Mormons and non-believers and humanists. This is the beauty of this country. It's a pluralistic country in which every point of view thrives. And the state should not be used to impose one point of view.
Going toward a secular state, does it bother you when you hear a person that came out of a secular state like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who in receiving the Templeton Prize stated, "If I were asked today to formulate as concisely as possible the main cause of the ruinous revolution that swallowed up some 60 million of our people, I could not put it more accurately than to repeat, men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened."
Andrei Zakharov, who is a secular humanist and who signed Humanist Manifesto 2 and the Secular Humanist Declaration, also is opposed to the tyranny in the Soviet Union.
Okay, give us a 30 second...
So if one believes in freedom and democracy, one doesn't necessarily have to believe in God. You can believe in God and believe in dictatorship, believe in the divine right of kings, believe in oligarchy. Democracy is too vital in this country. We believe in freedom. We believe in an open democratic society. We believe in a society in which religious bigotry does not prevail.
Okay, Dr. Geisler, give us a 30-second wrap up here.
Well, America was founded on basic Judeo-Christian principles, and they're the ones that gave secular humanists their right to express their view. Take a humanist, atheist country like Russia and see if there's any real religious freedom for people who don't believe in that. Actually, humanists ought to be in favor of these Judeo-Christian principles because they're the ones that give them their right to practice their humanism. At the same time, I don't think their ideals are being implemented because they're not giving us our right to express our views in the public schools.
Gentlemen, I just want to say thank you tonight. I asked you to share from your heart and to get involved with it, and I think that you have done that. And I appreciate, Paul, that you would come and express the views of the secular humanists, and Dr. Geisler, that you would represent Orthodox Christianity. Thank you, gentlemen, very, very much.
Thank you.